All right, at a news conference yesterday, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said Russian hackers successfully gained access to voter databases in 2 Florida counties ahead of the 2016 election. DeSantis emphasized that while the 2 counties experienced an intrusion, the hackers did not manipulate or change any data, and election results were not compromised. According to the Tampa Bay Times, DeSantis told reporters he had been briefed on the breach, but was not allowed to share which counties had been targeted. He said, quote, "I'm not allowed to name the counties. I signed a non-disclosure agreement," adding that he would be willing to name it, but they asked me to sign it, so I'm going to respect their wishes. As the Tampa Bay Times points out, it's highly unusual that the federal government would ask a governor to sign a non-disclosure agreement, especially in a case involving that governor's own state. Joe or Danny, what would be the circumstances that he needs to sign an NDA, and who are we worried about here?
Well, for
the American voters, or?
Well, the Trump administration has been worried for a long time, for a very long time, about transparency in this process. He's had all of his intel chiefs tell him that the Russians tried to hack our elections, that the Russians tried to influence our elections. He's dismissed it. He's called it fake news. Others have suggested it was just a couple of Facebook ads being bought. That's clearly not the case.
But, Joe, wouldn't it make sense that you need to know what counties here, that the voters deserve to know, that, but also in order to be able to prevent the problem from happening again, isn't a certain... Why would he be asked to not disclose the counties that were potentially breached?
Because Donald Trump and those working for Donald Trump believe that transparency in this process is actually a danger. Jim Vandehei, it is surreal. This is like saying, having the federal government say 2 buildings were attacked in New York City on September 11th, but no cameras are allowed, and we're not going to let you know. Or let's just say there was we'll take it back. So there was a plot to blow up another institution, but we're not going to let anybody know, so they won't be prepared next time. This really is crazy, and once again points to the fact that Donald Trump is aggressively trying to cover up any evidence that intel chiefs or his own cabinet agency heads are trying to pass along to him, that the Russians tried, in the words of Kirstjen Nielsen at DHS, that the Russians are trying to subvert American democracy.
And here's the bigger problem with it, right? Like, when you have the president keep waving people off of the idea that the Russians were infiltrating elections, whether it's in Florida or at a national scale. Yes, the Intel community continues to do its work, but if he's not putting the pressure on it, you're taking what might be the single biggest threat to American democracy and diminishing it and not putting the full force of the government behind it. Look what happened with WhatsApp. Look how vulnerable your data and your privacy has been on Facebook. Look at what happened in that last election and what Robert Mueller painted. If you are not all in on protecting us from cybersecurity threats and the ability of the Chinese or Russians, others, to manipulate our elections, you do that at your own peril. This actually isn't even a partisan topic. It is, if you talk to anybody who spent any time inside a government, the thing that scares them the most is some kind of cyber attack, some kind of ability to manipulate the vulnerabilities of technology to do really bad things, whether it's tip an election or screw up our electricity system. And so that's why this is problematic beyond Florida.
Well, Danny, I mean, what Jim just said is actually at the nub of it. And you have a sitting governor of one of the 50 states in Florida being told by the FBI, Dade County and Collier County in Florida, they both got into their electoral system. But here, we want you to sign this NDA, this non-disclosure agreement, so you won't name the counties in public. What would happen to a governor, in this case the governor of Florida, if he said no?
These are separate sovereigns. The state governor could arguably say no. He's not a federal employee that signs a non-disclosure type agreement when, as a condition of getting classified information. It might set up a...
Why would it be classified? Well, you probably...
No, I'm saying the example would be in the federal system, often employees have to sign something similar to a non-disclosure agreement. But in the case of 2 separate sovereigns, like the state and the federal government, arguably under the principles of federalism, there is no basis for the federal government to force or insist that a governor of a state, any state, sign a non-disclosure agreement. So there would be arguably a basis to resist.
Yeah, though, Mike, practically speaking, that Danny's right legally, but practically speaking, if you talk to federal authorities and you're governor of the state and you want information and they've got that information, they say, we'll give it to you, but you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Practically speaking, you sign that agreement, you get the information. And then you tell the press like Ron DeSantis did, and so it gets us asking all of these questions. Again, it does seem bizarre, doesn't it, Mike? I don't think the governor of Florida can, take any action, and he certainly shouldn't reveal those counties until he gets the go-ahead from the federal government, only because he signed the non-disclosure agreement. But it was a ridiculous thing to force the Florida governor to do.
Well, and it just seems to add to the suspicion that many people have that at the top of the pyramid, at the top of our government, we have a sitting president of the United States who consistently denies the extent to which the Russians hacked into our system and attempted to thwart democracy.
Yeah, and Mika, the fact that, again, they're working overtime to not be transparent, to be as elusive as possible on this information. Listen, I don't mean to bore our audience, but that's just what I do. I get paid to bore you, so let me bore you again. The director of the FBI said the Russians tried to subvert American democracy. By the way, Trump appointed him.
Yeah.
The National Director of Intelligence, top of the food chain for the intel community, who Donald Trump hired, said the Russians tried to subvert American democracy. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary, who the president appointed, said the Russians tried to subvert American democracy. The CIA director that Donald Trump appointed said that Russians tried to subvert American democracy. Our military leaders said the Russians tried to subvert American democracy in 2016, and we're going to try to do it again in 2018 and 2020. And now here we have evidence.
Yeah,
that far
down
from what,
to the locality.
Far from what testimony has been from Trump administration officials inside the White House, or from Donald Trump himself, this wasn't about a couple of Facebook ads being purchased. This was about Russians learning how to hack into our voting systems. And guess what? They got a couple in Florida in 2016. They've been working 4 years, night and day. Well, you and I have been sleeping. They've had people working, getting ready to hack into Michigan, getting ready to hack into Wisconsin, getting ready to hack into Pennsylvania and Florida. Mika? This is very serious, and
it is.
And we need to know what those two counties are, and the president needs to attitude adjustment on this, because right now he's doing Vladimir Putin's.
So it's interesting.
Vladimir Putin's bidding.
It's interesting that Ron DeSantis, I have to appreciate a lot about what he's doing. I haven't, he's definitely not on my side of the aisle, but he mentioned that there was this NDA. He could have just said, I can't disclose that. It seems to me he cared enough about America to say, I'm a little frustrated here. I signed an NDA. I would like to share what these are. I very much appreciate that he was as transparent as he can be. And we'll talk more about that. Still ahead on Morning Joe, 3 key voices from Capitol Hill. Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. From the House Intel Committee, Congressman Jim Himes. Also, Republican Senator James Lankford on how the trade fight is impacting farmers in his state of Oklahoma. We'll be right back with much more Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.